So I, like most of the world, have become pretty obsessed with the child from The Mandalorian, aka Baby Yoda. And I thought, what could I create to attempt to capture such cuteness? And I thought, 'tis the season for Christmas ornaments. So if you would like to learn how to make and add a little green bean to your tree this year, or just in general in your life, this video is for you. Let's start off with the materials that you'll need. Starting off with the template. The link to the template will be in the top of the description box, and I would recommend printing it out on some heavier cardstock paper. It will make it transferring and tracing the template onto your material a lot easier. Next, you'll need some craft foam sheets. You can really use whatever color you want, especially if you plan on painting it later. But if you want to go the easier route, you're going to need some green and some brown foam. You'll also need a pencil and/or pen, a craft knife and/or scissors, some glue of your choice, and some ribbon of your choice. Now if you want to create the more advanced version of this ornament, you're also going to need some Mod Podge, some acrylic craft paint, paintbrushes, and if you really want to go all out, some burlap-like fabric. The first thing you're going to need to do is to print out your template. Once that's done, begin to cut out your pieces. Right now, I'm only worried about the first 3 pieces, and I'm deciding to use a craft knife just because I prefer the effect. Next, you're going to want to start to trace those template pieces onto your foam. It's super easy to trace around the pieces if your paper is thicker. Make sure to trace 2 of the earpiece like the template states. Once you have all of those template pieces traced, you can begin to cut them out. Now to start assembling. Begin by gluing the earpieces onto the main headpiece, lining up the shape with the top of the ear. Then glue the face piece onto the main headpiece, again lining up the shape so that it matches. I also decided to shape the ears to give the ornament some extra dimension. This can easily be done by just stretching and shaping the foam with your thumbs. Next, go back to your template page and cut out the rest of the face pieces. I know piece number 5 is pretty small, so if you're having difficulties with it, don't worry about it. To make transferring it a bit easier, I actually decided to basically create a reverse template. Next, you can go ahead and start tracing all of those template pieces onto your foam as well. And of course, once all of those pieces are traced on, you can begin to cut them out. Once you have those pieces cut out, I'd recommend you use and cut out the finished head section at the top of the template page to use as a guide for placing the face pieces. First, glue the eye area piece down onto the face piece. Then use your finished face template as a guide to place the lower lip piece. I decided to flip to using white glue for this piece just because I didn't really feel like losing any of my fingertips. Next, use your face guide to place the nose piece. The nostril piece lines up perfectly at the bottom of that, so you probably don't need to use the guide again. As a bit of an advanced extra step, I actually decided to emboss some wrinkles into the forehead piece, using a ballpoint pen. The nice thing about craft foam is it's super easy to shape and make details in. I also decided to try and shape the forehead piece a little bit so it rounded out onto the top of the face a little better. Now that the head itself is fully assembled, I decided to go in and do even more wrinkles on the rest of the face. If you don't plan on painting your ornament, you probably don't want to do this because of the lines that the pen or pencil will leave. Unless of course you have a pen that is out of ink or something that won't leave marks. But because I'm fully painting mine later, I'm not worried about the marks. This is a completely optional step, but if you do plan on kind of going all out and making this fairly realistic, I would highly recommend doing it. It actually makes the paint job a lot easier. You can always use reference pictures of actual Baby Yoda to help you with placing the wrinkles. I also decided to use the face template to mark where the cloak is going to line up. Here's what my ornament base looks like if you want to use mine for reference for wrinkles. If you plan on going full out with the paint job, I would highly recommend that you use some matte Mod Podge to prime your foam. It's not necessary, but it does make the paint go on a lot easier. I applied a couple of coats of that before going ahead and doing a base coat of a darker green color. I personally really like using dry brushing techniques, and for that you really need to start off with a darker color than you actually need. I did decide to do a couple of coats of this green, but because it is a base color, I wasn't super worried about the evenness of it. Next, I decided to paint the eye area black, mainly so that it looked a little more like what we were going for as the end result. Now it's time to actually start the dry brushing. With a light green paint, I started on the forehead, just gradually building up some of the lighter color on the non-embossed areas, so anywhere like in between the wrinkles basically. To make it look a little more realistic, I essentially created like a fake lighting situation, so I actually made the top of the forehead and like the top of the head and the ears and stuff lighter than the kind of lower areas of the same piece. This is really all about building up the color gradually. You really don't want to rush in with too much paint and lose all of the detail that the darker green color is going to give you in the wrinkles. I'm sure there are a lot of people watching this that don't feel that confident in their painting abilities, but trust me, this technique is really simple for anyone to learn. The trick is to put your paint where you want it to be the most bright and opaque, and then wipe your paintbrush on a paper towel or something, and then use your significantly drier brush to help blend out that paint from that point. I also painted most of the inside of the ear area in that lighter green color. And I'm really just continuing to build up the brightness of the light green on the areas that really need the most highlights. As always, you could use actual reference pictures of Baby Yoda to help you with your paint job. I ended up really highlighting the top of the forehead, the top of the actual head, and around the eyes the most. And once you have all of your green dry brushing done, it's time to start adding the pink. Yes, Baby Yoda does indeed have pink tints in various parts of his face. Namely, you want to highlight the tip of the nose and around the eyes in the outer edges, with some salmonish colored paint. The inside of his ears also have a pink tint. They actually are pinker closer to the top and kind of fade to green down closer to the bottom of the ears. I also started adding in a dark to medium toned brown into the inner ear just to help build up some definition. I also added it along the top of the ear ridge and certain parts of the face to help build up some shadow. At this point, I'm basically just making some final adjustments and blending stuff out. The ears were actually one of the hardest parts of this paint job. The ears on the ornament are definitely more minimalistic than the ones on this little guy, and so I was just trying to figure out the nice balance between the details of the actual ears versus what would look appropriate on these ones. And now on to probably the most important part of this paint job, the eyes. With some pretty dark brown paint, I basically decided to just kind of go around in a circular fashion in the eye socket to gradually build up a bit of highlight color around the pupil. And then with a super thin brush, I went along the two outer corners of the eye with some white. And then it was really back to touching things up again. That's the one nice thing about acrylic paint, is if you're not happy with the shape of something or you accidentally kind of painted the wrong color where it shouldn't have been, you can easily go back in with the correct color and fix it. And once I had my pupil shapes all fixed up, I went in with some white paint with, again, a very small brush and created some highlights in the eyes. This is what really gives this ornament a super adorable look. I also went back with a slightly lighter brown and just dabbed a tiny bit around the inner circle of the iris. And if you really want to take this ornament to the next level, I decided to use some glossy Mod Podge to coat the eyes to give them that extra shiny look. And here's the result of that once it has completely dried. And now that the head is done, it is time to start working on the cloak. I'm sure you know the drill by now. First, cut out your template pieces before tracing them onto your foam, and then cut out your foam pieces. Now, I really wanted to go all out for this ornament, so I decided to cover these pieces in fabric. You could just go ahead and use the fabric straight as the cloak pieces, but I wanted to make sure that the pieces ended up being about the same shape as the template. Something like burlap ribbon would work great for this. I just decided to use some leftover scrap fabric from a Star Wars costume that I thought looked perfect for this guy's little cloak. I also decided to not wrap the foam pieces too perfectly and try and give it dimension in certain areas by gluing the fabric kind of bunched up to make it look more like an actual hood. Going back to the template page, I decided to use that final line art area that we used to help line up the head pieces as a guide again to help line up the cloak pieces. You want to overlap the cloak pieces in the front themselves before actually gluing it onto the head. Make sure to also glue the top outer edges of the cloak pieces along the back side of the ears to give it a put-together three-dimensional effect. And now onto the very final step, adding the ribbon. Cut a length of your ribbon of choice and glue the ends onto the back of the head, creating a loop to hang from. And here is the finished Baby Yoda ornament. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.